In 1994, Hollywood waged a $60 million war over a single man. Kevin Costner had the money, but Sam Elliott had the truth. This is how the underdog won.
To understand the sheer magnitude of this cinematic bloodbath, you have to transport yourself back to the early 1990s. The Western genre, which had been left for dead in the 1980s, was suddenly experiencing a massive, unexpected resurgence. Clint Eastwood had just completely redefined the cinematic landscape with Unforgiven, proving that audiences were absolutely starving for gritty, morally complex tales of the American frontier. At this exact moment in time, Kevin Costner was not just a movie star, he was the undisputed king of Hollywood. He was coming off the monumental, Oscar-winning triumph of Dances with Wolves, the global dominance of Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and the box office juggernaut that was The Bodyguard. When Kevin Costner snapped his fingers, studios opened their checkbooks and gave him whatever he asked for. At K Corral, everyone assumed it was a match made in cinematic heaven.
But there was a catastrophic creative collision right out of the gate. Costner read the script and absolutely hated the ensemble focus. Jar had written a sprawling, character-driven masterpiece that gave equal weight to Wyatt's brothers, Virgil and Morgan, and dedicated a massive amount of screen time to the tragically flawed, tubercular dentist turned gunfighter, Doc Holliday. Costner did not want an ensemble. He wanted a monument to himself. He demanded the script be entirely rewritten to center solely on Wyatt Earp, transforming it into a sweeping, monolithic epic where every other character was merely orbiting his star power. When the screenwriter refused to compromise his vision, Costner did the unthinkable. He walked away.
But he did not just walk away to find another project. He walked away to build a weapon. Costner teamed up with legendary filmmaker Lawrence Kasdan, and together they launched a rival project simply titled Wyatt Earp. This was the beginning of what Costner himself would later call a Hollywood space race. Costner leveraged his unbelievable industry clout to secure a staggering budget of over $60 million. For context, in 1993 money, that was an absolute fortune for a Western. The Wyatt Earp production was originally conceived as a massive 6-hour miniseries before being condensed into a theatrical release, but it retained that bloated, sprawling ambition.
Meanwhile, the orphan Tombstone project was picked up by Kurt Russell. Russell managed to secure a meager budget of just $25 million. That is a fraction of what Costner was playing with, and this is where the Sabotage narrative really kicks into high gear. Costner was allegedly furious that Tombstone was moving forward at all. Using his massive leverage, Costner reportedly went out of his way to squeeze the life out of the rival production. He utilized his connections at all the major distribution studios to freeze Tombstone out, making it incredibly difficult for them to secure a proper theatrical release platform. But the Sabotage became even more petty and aggressive than boardroom politics. Costner and his production team effectively cornered the market on Western authentic period costumes. They aggressively rented out almost every single piece of high-quality 1880s wardrobe available in Hollywood rental houses, creating an artificial supply chain bottleneck just to financially and logistically choke out the Tombstone production. This brings us to a desperately tense night in an Arizona Holiday Inn. The Tombstone production was buckling under the weight of industry pressure, extreme desert heat, and an incredibly tight budget. Kurt Russell was sitting in his hotel room, absolutely angst-ridden. He was staring down the barrel of competing against the biggest movie star on the planet, who had nearly triple the budget, the backing of Warner Brothers, and a massive head start on industry goodwill. Russell felt the walls closing in. He started to believe that Tinseltown simply was not big enough for 2 Wyatt Earp movies, and that their scrappy, underfunded underdog was going to be completely crushed by Costner's Goliath.
Enter Sam Elliott. Elliott had been cast as Virgil Earp, and he brought with him a lifetime of gravel-voiced authenticity and an absolute intolerance for industry panic.
Elliott walked into that hotel room, looked at a pacing, sweating Kurt Russell, and delivered a masterclass in psychological grounding. When Russell expressed his fear about the sheer scale and financial dominance of the Costner project, Elliott reportedly looked at him and said, "What the expletive are you worried about, man? They haven't got this script, and they haven't got this cast."
That was the ultimate, unfiltered truth. Sam Elliott recognized something that all the studio executives and Hollywood number crunchers completely missed. Money does not buy mythological resonance. Costner had $63 million, but Tombstone had an alchemy of talent that could not be manufactured. They had Val Kilmer delivering what would become a career-defining, scene-stealing performance as Doc Holliday. They had Powers Booth, Michael Biehn, Bill Paxton, and of course, Sam Elliott himself anchoring the emotional core of the Earp family. Elliott knew that a movie is not just a spreadsheet of expenses, it is the execution of a singular, tight narrative.
But wait, the chaos on the Tombstone set was only just beginning. If you think the external pressure from Kevin Costner was bad, the internal pressure was literally tearing the movie apart. Just weeks into filming, the studio realized that screenwriter Kevin Jarre, who was also directing the film, was entirely out of his depth behind the camera. He was falling massively behind schedule, obsessing over historical minutiae rather than getting the necessary coverage to piece together a functional action movie. The studio fired Jarre. The production was thrust into utter freefall. The cast was completely devastated, and the studio threatened to shut down the entire operation and write off the $25 million as a total loss.
This is the moment Kurt Russell transitioned from leading man to a silent general. To keep the studio off their backs, Russell brought in George P. Cosmatos to act as the credited director. But the worst-kept secret in Hollywood is that Kurt Russell essentially ghost-directed Tombstone. Every single night, after grueling days acting in the intense Arizona sun, Russell would stay up late, drawing out the shot lists, restructuring the schedule, and secretly handing the blueprints to Cosmatos to execute the next morning. Russell sacrificed his own character's screen time, actively cutting Wyatt Earp's lines to give more shine to Val Kilmer's Doc Holliday and Sam Elliott's Virgil Earp, because he understood the fundamental mechanics of pacing and ensemble dynamics. He operated with a completely egoless survival instinct, which was the exact opposite of what was happening on the set of Wyatt Earp.
Over in Costner's camp, Lawrence Kasdan was assembling a sprawling 3-hour and 12-minute historical documentary disguised as a summer blockbuster. Wyatt Earp was obsessed with historical pedantry. It chronicled Earp's life from his childhood in Missouri all the way to his twilight years in Alaska. It was a methodical, slow-burn character study. But here is the critical flaw in that approach, and a massive lesson in audience psychology. When an audience buys a ticket to a Western about Wyatt Earp, they are not looking for an exhaustive Wikipedia article translated to celluloid. They are looking for the myth. They are looking for the tension, the showdowns, the clear delineations of loyalty and vengeance.
Let us compare the ultimate centerpiece of both films, the legendary gunfight at the OK Corral. Costner's Wyatt Earp depicted a shootout with painstaking historical accuracy. Historians will tell you that the actual gunfight took place in a narrow, cramped 15-foot alleyway, and it was chaotic, claustrophobic, and over in less than a minute. Costner filmed it exactly like that. It was realistic, but from a cinematic standpoint, it was incredibly anticlimactic. It felt small. Tombstone, on the other hand, completely abandoned the geographical accuracy of the lot. They staged the shootout in a wide, expansive space, turning it into a 90-second masterclass of tension, staging, and explosive theatrical action. They leaned entirely into the legend. They gave the audience the emotional catharsis they had been craving for an hour and a half. When the dust finally settled and both films hit the theaters, the results sent shockwaves through the industry. Tombstone released first, hitting theaters in December of 1993. Despite its troubled production, its ghost director drama, and its smaller budget, It became a massive, undeniable phenomenon. The film grossed over $73 million, nearly tripling its budget. It became an instant cultural touchstone. The dialogue permeated pop culture, with Val Kilmer's iconic lines being quoted in every schoolyard and barroom across the country. It was lean, mean, and endlessly rewatchable. 6 months later, in June of 1994, Costner's Wyatt Earp finally lumbered into theaters. The giant had arrived, but audiences were already completely satiated by the high-octane thrill ride of Tombstone. Wyatt Earp opened to a dismal 4th place at the box office, grossing a pathetic $7.5 million in its opening weekend. Critics absolutely savaged its bloated runtime and glacial pacing. Audiences found it self-indulgent and dreary. Despite its massive $63 million budget, the film grossed only $55 million worldwide, rendering it a massive financial disaster for Warner Brothers. The Goliath had not just been defeated, it had been entirely humiliated.
The legacy of this cinematic war is a profound lesson in Hollywood economics and narrative focus. Kevin Costner had all the institutional leverage in the world. He had the money, the studio backing, and the power to actively sabotage his rivals. But Sam Elliott's quiet confidence in that Holiday Inn room was the ultimate prophecy. A massive budget and a superstar ego cannot fix a fundamentally flawed, self-indulgent premise. Kurt Russell and his scrappy team of underdogs triumphed because they understood that storytelling is about emotional momentum, not historical exhaustion. They trusted their script, they trusted their cast, and they delivered a masterpiece that is still universally beloved decades later. Interestingly, just recently, 30 years after the fact, Kevin Costner gave an interview where he admitted his deep regret over the situation. He acknowledged the fierce, petty competition and called it a weird space race that never should have happened. It is a sobering admission from a Hollywood giant who learned the hard way that throwing money at a rival does not guarantee a victory. It just makes the loss that much more expensive. But this $60 million war is only one chapter in the long, fascinating history of massive Hollywood egos crashing into reality. If you thought the sabotage of Tombstone was wild, you will not believe the catastrophic lengths productions will go to when the cameras roll on the open ocean. But that is a story for another day.